Hello, everyone, and welcome to my photo editing live, which we do here on the Digital Photo Mentor YouTube channel every Wednesday evening, 6 Mountain Standard Time. I'm Darlene, and I am the teacher and founder of Digital Photo Mentor, and I help beginner and intermediate photographers improve their work through photography tips and articles on my website and videos about processing and other things here on YouTube. So today is all about editing photos. If you are new to editing, and I've got some images from people who have submitted them who are brand new to editing, I make it nice and simple for you to follow along and give you some recommendations of software and tell you what I'm using and also what I recommend, especially if you're a brand new beginner. So all the images I'm going to be working on today have been submitted by subscribers, and you can do the same. So if you want to see your images next week, use the form in the description below, or Rob, who is my husband, in the chat will pop it in the chat for you. So just click on the form and you can answer a few questions and submit your images that way. I've got some great images of animals and plants today, otherwise known as Flora and Fauna. So without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, let me get that off of there. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat. So Vivian, Ron, Nigel, always here, always good to see you. Trish, hey, from New Zealand. We got lots of down under represented. Deb, welcome. Okay, we got the North represented with Alaska, and Holly from New Jersey. So we got East, West, North, South, all represented. Awesome. So as you can see, I've got several images up on the screen, and I want to start with one from somebody who has submitted images for the first time, Mark, and he has sent me a few images of these lily pads, which I thought were wonderful. And what I want to do is use some editing in Luminar and the templates. This is Luminar AI, okay, and the templates to show you what I did to enhance them, okay? So if you are brand new to editing like Mark is, follow along and see what I do with these images to spunk them up a little bit, because right out of the camera, they are very good images. There's a good subject, there's nice color, and so on. So what can we really do with editing? What is the point of editing to take it further, right? And when can you go too far? So we'll be looking at those things today. So the first thing I want to do is show you the image that I've already edited, and then I'm going to undo it and sort of show you how I got there. So this is the finished image. Let me just do a before. Okay, I'm going to go into the edit module here. Right, so you can see by the dots next to all these tools, right? These are the tools inside Luminar. All of the things that I've applied have a little dot next to them. So I've done a few different things, and I'll show you which ones I used and why. But let's take a look at the before image, and I'd love to hear from you in the chat what you think of this. Okay, so that's the before, right? Like I said, it's a good image. There's a nice subject. It's nice and crisp, but it's just a little bit sort of lackluster, right? The color's not as punchy as it could be. And with a little bit of editing, this image can really, really sing, okay? So let me undo this. Well, before I do this, I'm gonna save this as a template, and I'll come back to tell you about that in a moment, right? So you can save any of your templates, anything you do as an edit, you can save it, and then it shows up in here under my templates. Okay, so you can see that it's just saved that, and then I can rename it. So I'm just going to call it Lotus number 1. Okay, so that's my first version. So I'm doing that as a little bit of a test because I'm going to reset it, and let's see how close I can get the second time around, or maybe I'll come up with something completely different. Okay, so if you've done a bunch of edits in Luminar and you want to undo them, you can go into the history. Oh, and I forgot to mention, let me just pop back over here for a second. I'm literally wearing my Luminar hat today. Can you see? Right, so I did that so you know that I'm editing mostly in Luminar today. Okay, so you can go into the history panel over here and go all the way up to the top, or sorry, all the way to the bottom and click original, or you can go any steps and just kind of backtrack a few steps, okay? Or you can just right click on an image, choose adjustments, and choose revert to original, which is also Shift Command R as a keyboard shortcut. Okay. So that resets everything. Okay, and you can see that I also cropped it a little bit, and now we're back to the original image. Okay, so the original image, the first thing that I did actually was cropping it. So that is the Composition AI tool up here at the top. Okay, pressing the purple button opens up and activates the Composition AI, and the program will attempt to crop the image how it suggests that you should crop it. Okay, keep in mind that it always keeps the original aspect ratio. So I find that it does usually a good job, but I usually have to move it around to choose the placement. I'm actually going to come in a tiny bit more. And the reason that I'm doing this is I love what's happening with placing this flower off center. So now the lily pad and this little lotus flower are off center. And there's two lines that sort of lead to both of them. So there's some really great compositional elements in this image already. Right. So first thing we do, crop. Because the thing at the bottom, I might have had to erase it. There was a little flower on the edge of the frame. So anything that's like that on the edge, I might just crop it out and make my life easier. The next thing that I usually do, and I'm starting from scratch on this image as opposed to using a template so that I can show you sort of my approach and why I'm applying the things that I am applying, right? Accent AI, which is under the first tool, Enhance AI. Any of the tools that say AI means that they have artificial intelligence trying to analyze the image and make adjustments based on what the program thinks it should do. So let's take a look at Accent AI. Now, what I like to do is pull the slider all the way up and then settle somewhere in the middle. So a completely different way to go, excuse me, my nose is tickling, is to increase the saturate or increase the shadows so I get more of this reflection. Okay, so I had gone really dark and moody and sort of glowy, and this is another way to go. But I didn't like the look of the water because it just looked kind of murky and brown. So I wanted to minimize the water. Okay, so I left that a bit lower. So you can see what it does. It's punching up the blacks, it's brightening up things. It's doing overall a pretty good job. And Sky Enhancer, now notice it's getting tricked because it thinks that this is the sky over here where it's not. Okay, normally the Sky Enhancer would be grayed out in an image like this. The next thing I'm going to do is go to the light panel, and this is where you're going to do things like adjusting your exposure, the highlights, the shadows, and I like to open the curves tool down here as well. Rob, if you could please share the link to the curves video that I did on using curves, that will be really helpful because I'm not going to go in depth on this tutorial, but there's another lengthier one if you want to learn more about curves. So what I want to do here is I want to make sure that the histogram, which you can also see on the curves, you can view a smaller version if you go under view histogram, but I find this one not super useful, so I don't really have it on that much. I usually just use the one here under curves. So even if I'm not adjusting the curves, I open it just so that I can see the histogram. Right? Then I'm going to open the blacks and the whites. So what I want to do is this is the blacks also. Okay, so think of these bottom sliders under the curves, like if you've used levels, okay, or if you know what the histogram looks like, it's black on the left, white on the right. So this is black here. So if I drag this in, watch what happens. I get more of the blacks, okay? If I drag this one in, I'm going to get more whites, okay? So it's not affecting the midtones. They're just kind of compressing all together. If I drag this middle one, it's going to affect more of the midtones, right? See how that works? And then just double click if you don't want to apply it. So I'm going to pinch it in a little bit on both ends because I want the graph touching both sides without going off the edge of the graph. Okay. Something that's come up a few times is clipping. What is clipping? Okay. So I just turned on what's called the clipping warnings, and I'm just going to take these a little farther to show you what it looks like. When you have highlights that are off the top of the graph like this, you can see a spike here. And turning on your clipping warnings with the J key, you can see that these areas of the flower are now off the graph, which means they're white with no detail. So if you go to print this, any areas where you see this red highlight, it would just be paper-based white. Anywhere you see this blue outline or this blue highlight would be black with no detail. Okay, so the goal is to have detail in your highlights. Okay, so I don't want to pull the whites up so high as to get no detail, but I do actually want to clip the blacks a little bit. Right, the reason being is that I'm going to turn this warning off. The reason being is watch the color of the flower as I increase the blacks. You'll actually get more color saturation the more black and the more contrast you have in your image. Okay. I'm going to also change the color profile. This is something that I've talked a little bit about, particularly in Lightroom, but if you're using Luminar, this is the standalone version, and this is a raw file, you should be able to see color profiles designed just for your camera. Okay, so this one in particular has some camera options. So I could use the Adobe standard monochrome. That one looks really nice if I wanted to do that in black and white. So there's another whole idea altogether that I just happened upon by accident. Okay, but I like this purple. But look what happens when I go to landscape. Okay, landscape increases that color. Okay, vivid might work as well. Vivid looks great too, but I kind of like the colors under landscape. Actually, let's go with vivid because I really like that. Right? Originally on the other one, I did landscape, but I'm going to do vivid. So just by making a few changes to the contrast, look at how much more color it has, and to changing the camera profile. So do change the profile off of the default if your camera has profiles to install. If you don't have them, okay, you can go and find your profiles from the a website for your camera. You can get the profiles, or from an actual DNG file. That's a little bit more complicated than I want to get into doing today. So before and after is already getting pretty close to what I wanted to do with this image, with a few changes. Okay, let's take a look at our histogram again. Do we have any whites clipping? No, that looks pretty good. Let's keep that like that. All right, maybe I'll dial the blacks down just a tiny bit. So now you can see that the water, instead of looking murky and brown, actually looks black, right? So it gives the whole thing more punch. The next thing I'm going to do is increase the details and sharpen the image. That is under the details panel in Luminar. So go down here to details. And what I recommend is I usually go medium details between 20 and 30, large details around 10 or so. Sharpen, you can pull up to around 20. And if you want to keep the sharpening off of smooth areas, increase this bottom slider, this sharpening masking, and it will keep the sharpness to areas that have detail. Okay. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mask it because I don't want to sharpen all these bits in the water here because it looks like bugs or something floating on the water. And I just want to do that to the flower. So I'm going to open the mask tool. So at the top of every Luminar tool, there's undo or reset, mask, and toggle. Okay, so this just toggles the tool off and on. This is the mask. And I'm going to use paint in at 100% opacity because I know where I want it to go. And I could change the size of my brush just with the square bracket keys. And then when I click and start painting, you can see where I'm painting based on the red mask that appears. So I want to get the flower and the leaf, and then I'm just going to get the petals that are out here. And if I decided that I overpainted, okay, I can go back in here and just paint with a smaller brush and get some of these areas on the water, just remove the sharpening from there. So I don't have to do a perfect job, but it's doing a pretty good job, right? It doesn't have to be exactly to the edge, okay? Like so. Now, before I leave this tool, I'm also going to copy this mask. So there's 3 little dots here. Just pull that down and choose copy. And you'll see why when I go to the next tool, which is up a bit, called Structure AI. Okay, so Structure AI, I'm going to take it all the way just so you can see what it does. It's kind of like clarity or enhanced texture if you're using those sliders in Lightroom. And you can see it sort of adds this grunge effect. But if you go the other way, you can see that it softens or blurs. So guess where I might want to put that blur? I'm going to want to apply it to the same but opposite area. So I'm going to go paste in the mask. So now it's going to blur the flower and the leaf until I go back here and do invert. Okay, so now if I toggle this one off, you can see that it's blurring the water. So I've done two things to bring attention to the flower and the petal. So the whole idea of what I'm doing with these edits is to bring more attention where I want people to look, which is the actual subject. Okay, I could turn the sharpening off on the flower and the leaf and then back on. Okay, before and after. Okay, so increased contrast, sharpening where I want it, softening where I want it, and we're already probably 3/4 of the way finished. I add a vignette to almost every image. And the way that I do that, if you're not familiar with that term, a vignette means something you add to the edges. So either darkening or lightening. And what I do is I add it really dark, turn the feather down to 0 so you can see the edge of it. And then I just bring it in a little closer. Might even go a little rounder. So if I decide I want to put it on the flower, I'll darken a bit of this leaf as well, the pod, okay, the lily pad, I guess it's called. Right. Then when I turn my feather back up, it's going to soften the edge of the vignette. And then bring the amount back to something reasonable. Okay, so by darkening that little part of the leaf over here, I'm still keeping the eye in towards the center or the flowers. And I can even boost the inner light a little bit. You can see that the inside of the vignette is now getting lit. Okay. But the beautiful thing about the vignette in Luminar is that you can move it around, so you're not limited to having it just in the center. Let's see. How are we doing? I'm checking for questions in a moment. So if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat. And when I get to sort of finish this image, which is another maybe 2 filters, I'll come back and answer any questions about this one. Mystical is one of my absolute favorite tools in Luminar, and it gives you this sort of really cool glow, right? Look at what's happening to the petals of the flower, right? See that? See how cool that is? You can even increase the saturation. So I like what it's doing there. So I usually kind of put that in around 30 or so. And then glow is similar, but it gives you some choices. So if you're looking for the Orton effect, if you used to use Luminar 4, it still exists. It's just under glow now. And that's another one of my favorites. I use this one a lot actually on people photos, and it gives you this sort of overall really nice glow. Excuse me. And just lower the brightness because I find that it usually adds a lot of brightness. And I think I'm going to bring the contrast down as well. So between those two things, the glow and the mystical, now we've got some really nice sort of painterly look happening on the image, right? Now I'm pretty much done with that, but I'm going to show you one more little trick that's very cool for toning down things that you may not have considered. And that is the color tool. So if I go back up into essentials, these sticks in the water, I kind of like them, but I don't want them to be so prominent. So I'm going to guess that they are orange and yellow and red. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the luminance panel under HSL. So that's brightness. And I'm just going to lower yellow, red, and orange. Okay, now see what happened is I also darkened the flower, which I don't want, but we can fix that, remember? But I did darken down those sticks. So I think it's gone a little too far. So I'm just going to scale that back a little bit because I do want to see them. I just don't want them to be super prominent. Right? Remember the mask that we used earlier? Same thing. We're going to paste it in again. And then once again, invert it. Okay, so it applies to the outside of the flower and the leaf. So now when we apply this, it's only affecting the outer part in the water and those sticks. So that's a really quick way of darkening things in a particular color. You don't have to necessarily paint it in or out. Right? And we could take it a step farther and go and erase this stick if we wanted, because I don't really like it, and I might just do that. The erase tool inside of Luminar is absolutely fantastic. I was talking with somebody about this earlier today. So I'm just going to draw a line over that stick, click erase. Luminar does its thing, and it uses AI again. So it's similar to like Photoshop's content aware fill. It's going to try and fill that in. Look at that. Boom, gone. Okay, so any of these other little spots, if I want to get rid of them, I could do the same and just clean that up a little bit, even this little white spot here. Now, the reason that I'm doing this, so I like to talk about, I'll come back on camera here. The reason that I'm doing these things, and I like to talk about why I'm doing things, is so that you understand the logic behind how to approach this on your images, okay? Everything I'm doing is designed to bring your attention to one thing, the subject. In this case, it's that beautiful purple flower and the lily pad, okay? So all the things we've done, let me go back over here and do a before and after. Everything I've done to go from this image, notice how cluttered it feels, the reflection in the water, the spots and bugs and things in the water, the sticks, all take your attention away from that flower. Now, where does your eye go? Okay. Not only that, the color's punchier, it's vibrant, it's got this really cool glow, and I think this is a fantastic image. So let's save this one as well. I'm going to save that. Keep in mind that when you save a template, if you've done any masking, the mask saves as well. Okay, so you have to be careful of that. You're applying it onto another image, which I'm going to do in a moment. Okay, so that's my second edit. And let's just go back and take a look at the first edit and see if I did any different. Apply the first one. Okay, so I did a little warmer, it looks like. I think I applied a LUT as well. And this one is a little bit more purple, so a bit cooler. I actually think I like this version better, right? So there is no right or wrong. All right, let's see. Holly, I'm wearing your hat. Well, give me your address and I'll see what I can do, Holly. Send me an email. All right, let's see. Anybody else have any questions? Oh, sorry, the chicken photo is not yours. No, the chicken photo is, do I have a chicken photo today? Let me see. No, that's Krishna. Sorry. I'm not sure if I said Holly. That one's Krishna. And I have a chicken for next week, which is Regan. So nope, not your chicken. Right. So the next thing I want to show you is a couple of edits that I've already done. And sorry, let me go back to Luminar. I'm getting ahead of myself here. The next thing I want to show you is using this same template that I saved on these other images of the lily pad, okay? Because it's a similar location, similar color and everything, okay? So if I hit the template that I've saved or preset, so if you're used to using Lightroom, they're called presets, right? Now look at that, right out of the gate, without having to go back and do any of the masking. That's the only thing that I would correct here, is go in and adjust the mask on the sharpening and on the structure. But right off the bat, look at that. Looks pretty good, right? Let's see what the second one looks like. Right, this case, I like the first one. It's a bit warmer. Okay, so the only thing I would do here is apply that template and then go and take a look at the details mask. Okay, and if you hit the / key, you'll see your mask. Okay, so you can see that I've got it sort of in the middle, which we can just increase it to affect this flower as well, and maybe a little bit of this pad here. Okay, so we don't want to sharpen everything. We're just going to sharpen the middle, and then I'm just going to copy this mask and go apply it to the structure and invert it like we did before. Okay? So paste, invert, and now it's matching for this image. Okay? We can take a look at color because we may not need to do the color on this one, right? Because it's darkening oranges and yellows, but it actually does a good job. So I could leave that, or we could reset this one because I have another idea on this one. If I want to lower the yellows and the greens a little bit, right? See how it happens is it darkens all the leaves and brings the attention over to this little flower. Maybe even bring the oranges down. So I'm darkening everything. Now let's say I just want that to apply to this leaf up top here. I can just paint that in, right? So if I think the leaf up at the top is taking too much attention, I just paint it in. Or this one over here. So I get to decide which leaves I'm going to darken and which leaves I'm going to leave. Like so. So very quickly, just applying a template, the same template that I just made to a similar image, get the finished image within a couple of clicks. Oops, I meant to grab a different image. So one last image of the lotus flowers. This looks like a great location to shoot. Before I apply the template, I'm going to do the cropping. So I'm going to open the composition tool. And I'm going to hit Composition AI and let's see what it comes up with. And I want to get rid of this sort of rock wall at the top here. It also looks crooked. So I'm just going to straighten it a little bit and then mostly get rid of this wall. So I could keep these. I like the reflection that's happening. And I'm going to come in a little bit closer. Again, keeping the flowers off center a little bit and just hit enter. Okay, now let's go back to our templates. Let's try the purple one this time, which is number 2. Boom, right? So if you're happy with that, you're literally done. Or you can go in and make a few tweaks because it's going to show you which edits have been done based on the dots. Yep, this one I like the purple one better, right? Something I want to show you though is I've created a series of portrait templates. And even though it says it's a portrait template or it's called a portrait template, you can apply it to other things as well. So for example, I have one that is a really contrasty black and white called Hollywood Heyday. Okay, so if I apply that one, right, I can go in and adjust the black and white a little bit. Or I could decide I want to do, let's see, I've got one called Bokeh Bliss, which actually applies some bokeh on the image as an overlay, like that. And we could do something really cool. And this is actually something that I'm working on, and Holly has been a tester for me. So I'm working on this set of bokeh templates so that you can apply this kind of thing to your image, right? Let me just dial it down a little bit. So you can do something really different. And just because it's called a portrait template doesn't mean you have to use it only on portraits. Okay. There's a question here. Okay. Trish wants to know what happens when you edit an image in Luminar that you've imported from Luminar, but you can't finish it in one session. Can you send it back to Lightroom and redo it next time? Yes and no. Okay, let me show you how to do it in such a way that you can continue where you left off. Okay, it's not quite as simple as opening it as a plugin. Let me get in here. Okay, let me do this on the little giraffe here as an example. Okay, so if, for example, I want to, actually, I'll do this one here. If I want to edit this image in Luminar, I can right click and choose edit in and then choose Luminar. So I'm going to do this 2 different ways. And I'm just going to do a JPEG just so that it goes faster in terms of processing speed on my computer. I'm going to open it from here directly into Luminar, do an edit, and then it will bring it back into Lightroom for you. And then I'm going to show you the alternate method, which is more non-destructive and what Trish was describing, right? Hopefully my Luminar is opening in a moment here. I've got 2 versions of Luminar open. It's coming. There it is. Okay, so now I'm just going to pick a template. I know I've got one that's called Golden Light. Again, this is another one of my portrait templates. Rob, if you could please share a link to the portrait templates. They're called Fabulous Faces. And this is actually kind of similar to what I was going to do with this image anyways. So I'm just going to apply this. I'm not going to do anything else, just to show you the process really quickly of using Luminar as a plugin directly from Lightroom, okay, versus putting Photoshop in the middle. When you use anything as a plugin for Lightroom directly, okay, if you open it into that plugin and save it, it saves and cooks in those edits, okay? So it's not going to allow you to open it back up in that plugin and continue from where you left off, okay? Because if I go back to Lightroom and try and open this image in Luminar again, the edits will be cooked in, meaning I'd have to start. It's like a brand new image with no edits on it. Okay. I won't see what's been done in Luminar previously. It's a brand new image. Okay. So what you want to do instead, if you want to do that, if you're not done your edits, you have two options. Number one, either just open it in Luminar directly and edit it there, or assuming that you have the Adobe package, Trish, choose edit in, and then smart object, open as smart object in Photoshop. Okay. So when it opens in Photoshop, if you've used, let me know, Trish, if you have the current subscription to Lightroom and Photoshop, because you need the current version to be able to have them talk to each other. So when you open the image into Photoshop as a smart object, any filters or anything that you apply to that layer is editable. Okay, so this is the ultimate in what's called non-destructive photo editing, right? And where's my Photoshop? Here's Photoshop. Is it coming? It's thinking about it. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's the image of Photoshop, and let me just grab my layers panel. Okay, so when you, let me see if I can make this bigger. When you look at layers, I forgot how to make the thumbnails bigger. There we go. Okay, so when you see this little thumbnail here, and I know it's small, and I apologize, you see a little sort of, it looks like a paper folded on the corner. That means that this is a smart object, okay? So from there, you can go Filter, Skylum, and Luminar AI. If you have any of these other plugins, like I have some of the Topaz plugins as well, which I've used on a few other images today, okay, you can start them from here also. So I'm going to go Skylum, Luminar AI, and I'm going to pick a different template, okay? So I apologize for having you wait, but when we go from one to the other, sometimes there's a little bit of a wait time, and when I'm streaming video, my computer is taking a lot of memory to do all of these things, so it's pulling a lot of memory having all this stuff opened, okay? Okay, so my Luminar is opening. There's the image again. And I'm going to pick a different template. Let's maybe pick one that it's suggesting. Let's pick a black and white, just for the heck of it. Okay, so there's a black and white. Now, normally, I mean, I wouldn't probably do this in here. I would just do black and white in Lightroom, but I'm just trying to pick something that's different. Let's try that. Okay, there we go. Oops, no, we don't want to change the sky. Let's stick with that one. Okay, so apply it again. So this is the same process that I just did a moment ago when I went from Lightroom directly to Luminar. I got to think in my head which software I'm talking about. Now we've gone from Lightroom to Photoshop to Luminar. And now once I've hit apply, it's coming back to Photoshop first, okay? So think of Photoshop as the middle step or the interim step. And when Luminar closes, okay, you can see it says plugin started. Now it's applying this in Photoshop, okay? You'll see the edit, okay? And now it's appeared down here. So you can see where it says Smart Filters. I know it's small, I apologize. So this says Smart Filters and Luminar AI. So what that means is that this filter is applying to this layer. And if I want to get back here anytime, I just have to double click this and it will open Luminar up again from the same place that I left off. I can apply a different template or a different edit. This is a great question, Trish. I wasn't planning on covering this today, but this is something that I've actually been asked before. So this is great for me to cover this. Okay, so the workflow with Lightroom as a plugin has a few options. And this is the one that I use if I think I'm going to go back and maybe change anything to the image. If I know that I just want to apply the mystical filter at the end or something like that, I'll go directly from Lightroom into Luminar. Okay. Let's pick a different one. Let's see. What would you like to see? Something different. Okay, there. It looks antique-y. Let's pick that one. This image has got lots of different potential looks already. And Trish says, yes, she does have the current version of Photoshop and Lightroom. So that's great. Okay. So you should be able to follow along. This video will be available after the live that you can watch again later. And Rob will usually go in later and put timestamps. So he'll timestamp this one so that you can click on that to get just to this section and get the answer you need. And then you can follow along with this at home, right? So now we're back in Photoshop. You can see that the filter has still applied. Next, I'm just going to do save, right? And it's going to save the file in Photoshop, usually as a PSD because that's what I've got set as my default. And then I'm going to close it, which means that it's going to send that image back to Lightroom. But there's a difference. And once you get back to Lightroom, there's a difference on how you open it, right? Wait for that to come back. Usually it takes a moment to save, and we should see it up here. One other tip is if you've done anything with a plugin and you've got a lot of images in this folder and the image that you've just created with the plugin doesn't show up next to it like mine are here, okay, it's possible that you've just got them sorted by a capture time or added time, meaning that it may have showed up at the bottom. Okay, so if you've gone through this process with your plugin and your image is missing, just change your sort order to file name, and then they should be side by side like this, right? Okay, so now you can see that this one is a PSD file, okay? So it's a Photoshop document, which means that it has the layers. So if I want to get back to Luminar inside of Photoshop again, I just right-click, choose Edit In, but this time I'm not going to choose Smart Object. I'm going to choose Edit in Photoshop and Edit Original, okay? So what that means is it's going to open exactly the same file that I just had opened a minute ago, okay? And we're doing this real time so you can see how fast it goes. And there's the same file with the same filter and layer. And if I double click it, I go right back to Luminar, okay? So I'm just gonna close out of that because we're eating up a lot of memory here. So I hope that answers your question, Trish. Okay. I know that's a lot to kind of digest, but the summary of that would be if you have just a quick edit to do in Luminar and you know that it's just like one little thing, open it as a plugin directly from Lightroom to Luminar, and then you'll have a new finished file. If you want to come back later and edit it again where you left off, open as a smart object in Photoshop. From there, evoke the filter as Luminar, save it back in Photoshop, save it back in Lightroom. So it's a couple of extra steps in the middle, but it allows you that working file, because if I try and open the other one, it will just open this file in Luminar and start from there. I can't get back to the original. Okay? Great question. That will make a great standalone tutorial. So yeah, that's one that I've actually been wanting to do for a while, Trish. So thank you. You helped me make a tutorial, and we'll be sharing that actually probably as a clip out from this one. So thanks for a great question. You win the prize today for great question. Unfortunately, I can't ship a hat to New Zealand. All right, let's see what else I was going to do. Now, this one here was sent by Linton, who I don't think is here today, but he's in Australia as well. And I did a bit of editing on this one in Lightroom. And let me just turn this off here. So what I wanted to do first, before I show you the main edit that I did here, is I mostly just brightened it up because it was very dark, right? And I did that in Lightroom with plus exposure, minus highlights, plus shadows, plus whites, and plus blacks, okay? So I did all of this in this basic panel here. You could also do a bit of that in the curves tool, but the bigger problem is that it's actually blurry, okay? Can you see that the Pelican is not sharp, okay? The concern that I have is, think about, so this is not just about editing. I like to give photo tips as well as we go along here, because what's happening is the way that it was photographed has created two things, okay? It's created an underexposed image, right? And two reasons why that occurred. First of all, it was shot with spot metering, okay, which I generally don't recommend for anybody, okay? Spot metering, you really need to know what you're doing, because what that means is that your camera's only measuring the light in a very, very small spot, right? And if it hits that Pelican, which is white, your camera works in such a way that what it's trying to do is whatever it measures, it is going to make that thing medium gray. So if it measures off of something white, it's going to darken your whole picture. If it measures off something dark, it's going to overexpose the whole picture. So going back to the Pelican, if the spot meter had hit over here, the whole picture would be overexposed. If the spot meter hit the bird, which is what I'm guessing happened, it underexposed, okay? The other thing that's potentially a problem for underexposure is the shooting mode. In this case, shutter priority. You can see that up here. Okay, so he's chosen 1,000th of a second and ISO 200. The challenge with that is that I don't think it's a problem here because he hasn't maxed out the aperture of his lens. If you don't have a big enough aperture on your lens and the shutter speed is really fast and the ISO is slow, those two things combined are not letting a lot of light in. So the camera needs to open the aperture, okay, as big as possible. And if you don't have a lens with a big aperture, you might get an underexposed image, okay? So generally, I don't shoot in shutter priority when I'm doing almost nothing, okay? The only time I shoot in shutter priority myself is if I'm panning an image, okay? In a scenario like this, I understand why you might want to have a fast shutter speed in case the bird takes off and is in flight and so on. Okay, but what I would recommend instead is shoot in manual mode, set it to the shutter speed that you want, set it to your largest aperture, and then set auto ISO. Okay, so then what will happen is if you hit the exposure level where it's starting to underexpose, it'll increase the ISO for you. Okay, as opposed to just giving you an underexposed image. So I've done all of those things to boost up the exposure, right, in here. So I've actually increased it 2 stops. So that means it was really, really underexposed, okay? Let me show you the original again, okay? See how dark it is? So even this white area of the bird is actually gray, okay? If I reset to the original, I cropped it in as well. Look at the histogram, okay? So it means that what this means where the data ends before the whites, it means there's absolutely nothing white in this picture, okay? It starts at light gray, okay? So the brightest part that looks white here is actually light gray already, right? So I'm just gonna undo that. So I cropped it in. When you have a subject that's facing a direction, you want to have space in front of the subject. So that's why I've cropped the space off from behind the Pelican and below, okay? Because the space down there, if I just reset it, you don't really need that. There's nothing down here. And he's kind of, the reflection and him are right in the middle. So if I come in, now he's off center. He's sort of in this third, okay? If you're not seeing this grid or you're seeing something different, you might see that or you might see some weird thing. Just hit O on your keyboard until you see the grid that you want, okay? That one is the rule of thirds, so it's dividing your picture into thirds. And some of these others are things like Fibonacci sequence, this one, different cropping, so you can see different aspect ratios. And this one's handy if you just want to see if your image is level, okay? But for the most part, I would recommend this one. So I put him off to the side so he's got space to move into, right? Now, the other thing I did with this one to sharpen him up, and I'm just going to show you the difference, is Lightroom's sharpening is not so great. So I can sharpen, right? And I can increase the mask, which takes the sharpening off of sort of smooth areas, right? I'm holding the Alt key down. So what that does is everything that's white is currently being sharpened. And as I increase the mask, it's just the outlines being sharpened. So that's going to help make the background not be so noisy. Because look what's happening, right? It's making this image look super noisy. Let me just zoom in even more. So even though he shot this at ISO 200, because it was 2 stops underexposed, that's where the noise comes from. Okay. So a lot of times people will use a low ISO in order to keep the noise down. But then if you're underexposing because of that low ISO, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot because you're not gaining anything. Okay. Because you're actually, by the time I try and remove the noise, it's going back to blurry. Right. So there's this dance between trying to sharpen and trying to remove the noise. Right. If I turn off this details, right, so you can see there's lots of color noise, all these little colored speckles, that's color noise as well. So it's better, but he's still not sharp. So what I did with this one, I could try to pull this one in. Let me open this guy in another plugin. Rob, if you could please share the video of Topaz Sharpen AI. So I'm going to open this one in Sharpen AI in the background. And while that's happening, I'm just going to show you the result of what I did already with it previously. The reason that I'm doing that is because Sharpen is a really memory intensive program and it takes a long time. Okay, now it's taking my memory. I get the rainbow spinning wheel. I call that the spinning wheel of hell. You can't see my spinning wheel, but it's spinning. It takes up a lot of resources. And in fact, I'm just going to close Photoshop because it takes a lot of memory. And this is going to open Topaz. Okay, so it takes a long time to even draw the preview. So you can see this little progress bar down at the bottom that it's drawing the preview. So let me just pop back over. Won't even let me open Lightroom. Shoot. Okay, we're stuck in Topaz now. So this one here, you can choose to correct the blur of an image using motion blur setting, out of focus, or just too soft. Now this one, I'm guessing it's a motion blur because it looks like there's a double image. Okay, so I'm going to use motion blur and the very blurry settings. It's a pretty simple interface. There's not a lot that you can do wrong with it. And you can use the auto settings to let the program decide what's the best for you. But you can see how long it takes to update, right? So, and this is a JPEG. So if I had opened the raw file directly, it takes a really long time. So I generally don't demonstrate Sharpen live, but you can see what it's the settings and what it's doing here. So I'm actually just going to cancel out because you can see it's done a really nice job. You can also mask it, which I did, so that it only painted the settings onto the bird. Okay, so I'm going to cancel out of here because it just takes up a lot of memory. Right, so this is the one I didn't do anything to. So let's look at the two that I edited side by side. Okay. And let's zoom in. So see the difference? The one on the left is the Lightroom edit, and that's with the Lightroom sharpening applied. That's the best I could get in Lightroom, right? This is the best I could get in Topaz Sharpen. Look at the difference. You can see that he has feathers. You can see all of the texture, but I chose not to apply it to the background or the water just so that I kept that edginess to the bird, right? So it's a great plugin, and I did another example of this one on another image, right? So if you have images like this that are one of a kind that maybe you need to rescue. I don't recommend, getting this program to save all your out of focus images, but it happens. We all have some images that the focus missed a little bit, or the subject was moving, or something like that, or you didn't have quite enough depth of field to cover your subject. Topaz Sharpen is a great thing to have in your toolbox. And the way that I would use it is, if you are using Lightroom, open it just like I did after you've done all the rest of your edits as a plugin, apply the sharpening, and you're done. Okay. If you're using Luminar, finish the image editing, export it, and then run it through Sharpen and save it again. Okay. So because Topaz and Luminar, I don't think work together yet. Now I did another similar one with this bird, right? So we've got birds today. We're going to the birds. This one also was a little bit out of focus, and I did some basic edits to darken it. And what I used here was a radial filter. Okay. Rob, if you could please share the link to the video that I just did recently on radial filters. And we have a new one coming out later this week on graduated filters. So wait for that one. Radial filters allow you to adjust just part of an image. And in this case, I'm applying it to the outside part around the bird. Okay, so I've done this to darken the edges around the bird. Okay, because the vignette in Lightroom is not positionable, the radial filter is what you want to use if you need an off-center darkening like this. Right, so that's what I've done there. And I added some texture and clarity. The other thing is you can actually, besides darken, I lowered the clarity in the texture, and I could even lower the sharpness and blur it right out. Let me take it more extreme. Okay, so see how I'm blurring the edge as well? Like, I don't want to go that far, but it just takes the eye away from the subject when you have everything sharp. Okay, so this is my standard little tip here. Question. Okay, who's going to be able to name the 4 things in an image that will take your eye away from the subject? Okay, I just mentioned one of them. So tell me in the chat 4 things that you want to look for, particularly in the background, and not have them in the background. Anybody know what they are? You'll get bonus points if you can name all 4. And I'll share the answer with you in a moment. So I ran this little bird through the sharpen filter as well. Because the Lightroom sharpening doesn't do a great job, you can already see it's a lot better. So I ran it through Topaz, and I masked off just the bird and his leg as well. So let me zoom in. Maybe not zoom in quite that much. Okay, so you can see how much sharper his foot and the ground is. It really, really does an amazing job, right? Let me scroll this up. Look at the feathers, right? You can actually see the detail in the feathers. Missed a little bit there, so I might have done not so good with my mask. And it's kind of missing his beak a little bit there. So maybe again, my mask wasn't good when I did that. So I would go back and give that another go with Topaz. I did it really, really quickly, but you could see the difference here, especially around his face. Okay. So that's a great other tool to add to your arsenal. I did another version, and this is the Topaz Topaz promoter today, because this image was the same. And this is a fantastic image that was submitted by a new person for the first time. Stephanie submit this image, and she wanted to know about detail. So the basic panel, color grading, and detail. And detail, I did a couple of different things here. So again, the image on the left is the Lightroom version, and I'll show you the before original. So this is sharpened in Lightroom on the left, sharpened in Topaz on the right. Look at that. How amazing is that? And the right one now is sharpened in Luminar. So Luminar did an okay job. I think that Lightroom and Luminar are about the same. I could play with that a little bit more, but Topaz just blows me away. Like when you look at the tail, like that looks like it's in perfect focus to me, right? So how it takes an image that's absolutely out of focus and focuses it is baffling to me, right? But it does. So it's pretty amazing. All right, let me go back over here to this guy. All right, where's my original edit? Oh, sorry, that's the original edit. Yeah. Okay, so I couldn't tell the difference between Luminar and Lightroom. That's how similar they were. All right. Oh, yay, Stephanie's here. So yes, I'm going to show you how I got to your image as well. And if you haven't guessed the 4 things that you want to avoid in the background, I've put them on the bottom of the screen now. Okay, so everything that I've done before with the lotus flower, I was removing bright things. I was removing things that were sharp, that were in sharp focus around the subject. I was removing things that were brightly colored, like the sticks, right? And contrast, okay? So all of those things and all of the things that I do with the editing is to bring the focus and attention into the subject by eliminating those 4 things in the background. So you want to do as much of that as you can when you're shooting, and then take it to the next level when you're processing. So I wanted to show you the before image of this one, okay? So it was a little bit bright. I'm just gonna create a duplicate here and reset it so I can show you what I've done. Okay, so that's the original image. And if you look at it, there's nothing actually clipping except a tiny little bit on his wings here. So technically it's a good exposure, okay? But it's overly bright for the subject matter, okay? So when I darken it down, I'm at minus 0.9 on exposure. I brought the highlights down. And remember, when you're doing the highlights and the whites and the blacks, it's kind of a little dance, okay? So what I often do is I'll just reset all of this here. I'll just reset the tone. Okay, so what I want to do is lower the exposure a bit first. Okay, so exposure is mid-tones. Okay, you can also adjust the exposure by grabbing the middle of the histogram here and dragging it here. Okay, so you notice that it's grabbing the middle of the graph and it's mostly affecting the midtones. Okay, I want to make sure that I have some clean white, so I'm clicking Alt and holding it. So there's only a couple of little highlights that are clipping. So anything that shows in these little dots here is clipping. So I go up high to clip everything or lots, and then bring it back down until there's no clipping of the highlights or minimal. Okay, blacks. Okay, now watch the magic that happens here. Okay, we have some really nice color in this image, right? But watch what happens when I draw in some blacks. Okay, so now the blacks are clipping in those areas. Look at the color difference. Okay, let me just undo that. Okay, see how sort of blah and flat it is versus that. Blah, color. Okay, so if you're lacking color, don't grab the saturation slider. Check that you have blacks. That's the biggest problem. Okay. I also did this edit inside of Luminar as the standalone version. So I wanted to show you that one. I think this is it. Let's see. I've got 2 versions in here. No, I got the other one. There we go. So this is the one that I've edited inside of Luminar, I think. I'll know when the dots show up here. All right, so you can see that I've done similar things. I've darkened it and I've added some sharpness and some detail. Now it didn't come out quite as sharp as the Topaz version. So what I would do in this case, if you're using Luminar, and I think Stephanie's using Lightroom, if I'm correct, I would not apply the details or the structure here. I would leave that alone. And if I'm going to sharpen it in Topaz, finish this, export a new file, and then sharpen the finished file in Topaz, right? The thing I did inside of Luminar that I didn't do and I couldn't do as well in Lightroom is I actually darkened this bit here, right? And I darkened these blocks down. Now I could do the same thing in Lightroom. I could do that using the HSL panel, okay? So the neat thing about the HSL panel in Luminar versus Lightroom is that I can paint it in, okay? So if I decide I want to take the yellows and the greens down in brightness, right, like so, I can do that and it applies to the entire image, right? If I want to do that in Luminar, I can do that up here under color, right? And you can see that I did do that. I'll take it a little farther just so that you can see, okay? But if I decide, well, I just want to do that on that one spot, I can paint it in. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a really big brush and paint in it this side. Okay, so we see the mask. So I'm sort of desaturating that, and I can do a little bit over here as well. I'm just going to take one pass. So I want it, again, to keep attention to that guy in the middle, and I'm just lowering the saturation and brightness on these outer ones by doing the mask. Okay, so I cannot do that in Lightroom. So anything I do in this HSL panel is a global edit, which applies to the entire image. Okay. Let's see. The other thing I did in Luminar is I used this super contrast tool, which is really cool because I'm just going to undo it. It allows me to adjust the tones and contrast of the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows separately. So if I pull up the highlights, then you play with the balance. So one direction to the right darkens them, and you can see it's a darkening. It's applying to this area and this area. Okay. So if I darken, you can see that it's doing a really nice job on that background because I want to get rid of that sort of contrast there. And let's see the midtones. Okay, so that does a nice job everywhere. Look at how spunky that is. And I just want to erase it off of that bit on the wing because I want this highlight to stay a highlight, right? And what it's doing is it's darkening this highlight. So I want to keep the highlights on my little bug, right? Like so. So you get to decide where it applies with the mask. And voila. Let's see, turn it off. Now you see it's subtle, but it's just correcting that background a little bit, right? So there's the before and after in Luminar. And look at how much that dragonfly really stands out. And the before and after here, right? So my final step in either program would be to take it over to Topaz to add a little bit of sharpening. All right. So you happy with that, Stephanie? Did you like that edit? And thank you for submitting. I don't think I've seen your image before, so thank you for submitting. I just saw it come in today, and maybe an hour before the session started, and I love the image, so I thought I would grab it, and it would make a great example, right? So any other questions about those? Awesome. Please submit some more. That was a fabulous image. I'd love to see what else you have. All right, I've got a couple more that I want to do. We're going to keep it to just over an hour today. So I think I'm just going to do one more. And this one is by Antrine, and she's in Europe. Now I forget, I want to say she's in the Netherlands. She's been a past tutoring student of mine. And she asked, how could I make this image pop? And she likes what's happening on the bottom, okay, because there's some nice light happening here in the dust. And this is a perfect image for me to show you that what I was talking about, where the 4 things that draw your attention, right? So I'm just going to remove myself from the screen so you can see just the image here, okay? So where does your eye go when you look at this image upside down? So when you look at an image upside down, your eye will gravitate naturally to the things that it is attracted to, which is what I described. Okay, so the brightest areas, the areas of the most contrast, the areas with bright, especially warm colors like orange, yellow, and red, and the areas of sharpness. Okay, so where is that in this image? I want to hear from somebody, okay, because it's not where you want the eye to be going right now. So my eye goes to 2 different places, right? For me, it's going to the horse's buttocks right here and this little highlight on the saddle, okay? So I want to tone those down, okay, and see if I can fix that, okay? So Rob is paying attention, okay? The ground, the back of the horse, the back of the saddle, and the butt. Yep, exactly. Okay, so let's go right side up, first of all. If you want to turn your image upside down in Lightroom, I'm just pressing Command or Control, square bracket keys. Twice rotates it this way, and then twice more rotates it back. Okay. Just a little shortcut. All right, so first I'm going to go up and do that color profile again. Right now, I don't see any camera profiles. I'm not sure which camera she's using, but I'm going to pick one of the Adobe ones that's a little bit better. Now, this is a high contrast image, so I'm actually going to start with one that's a little bit lower contrast, like neutral. Let me come back on the screen here. So I'm choosing the neutral, and you can see just by choosing that, let's see the before. Okay, see how much detail it's picked up just by changing the profile. So I always do that first before anything else. Sometimes I leave it the same, but that's going to be the first thing. Okay, now when I click the Alt Option key and click the white slider, you can see what's clipping is that back of the saddle and the hat. Okay, so there's two ways I could do this. I could bring this highlights down until that goes away. Okay, so that solves the problem. Or I could just affect that area with a little radial filter, right? Because the problem with doing this as a global edit is it's also bringing the highlight down everywhere else, including on the face. Okay, so I'm just going to bring this down until now the horse's butt sort of looks more gray and the saddle is toned down. Right? Can you see that? And that was just a radial filter. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is crop it. So remember what I said about our friend the Pelican? If there is something that's moving a certain direction, you want space in front. Okay, and right now the horse's nose is right at the end of the picture. So I'm just going to crop in, and I'm not going to worry about the aspect ratio. I'm just going to come in from the left, right? Because, excuse me, there's no room on the bottom. I don't want to crop that. And I don't really want to lose any headspace. Maybe a bit. Okay, so there's our crop. Now I'm going to do a trick with the whites and the blacks. Okay, so hold the shift key, double click the word blacks. And I'm going to try whites, but I think it's going to, oh yeah, it worked. Okay, so what that did was it adjusted the white and the black sliders so that it's just touching the edges of the graph. Then I'm going to go back and then remember, check that black. I want some black clipping because it's going to increase that saturation, right? I'm going to try maybe adjusting the white balance. Let's try auto. Okay, that got warmer. Okay, do you see how everything sort of, even the dirt and the horse looks a little bit blue? So try auto. I could try daylight. Okay, daylight's not bad. Looks a little green. I'm just going to add a little more magenta. And I'm going to brighten up the whole thing overall. Okay, so now look what happens. Okay, so now the horse and the kid become the subject, and the rest becomes a little bit overly bright, but we can fix that easily enough. Okay, I can add an edge vignette, and that's under effects. So I'm just going to dial that down. Okay, remember the Luminar one is adjustable for positioning. Lightroom's only goes from the center. So I'm just going to pull it down a little bit. Okay, darken that. And then I'm going to use a graduated filter. Again, this is coming out this week, so watch for that video. And I'm going to bring the highlights. Actually, I'm not going to bring the highlights down. I'm going to bring the exposure down. Okay, because this highlight area is not clipping. I want to keep that highlight because that's part of the interesting part of the image. Like she said, she likes the bottom part, but she wants this part to pop more. Okay, so all I'm doing now is darkening the bottom part of the image. I've brightened up the entire image and darkened the bottom. The other way I could have done it is to left the image a little bit darker and then lighten the top part. Okay, so there's a few different ways that you can approach that. Okay, so let's go a little darker. And then I'm going to apply another radial filter. There's one called Dodge Face, and I'm just going to apply it over the little guy here so that he's getting lightened. And I want to make sure it's not on that saddle, okay? Because if I clip that saddle, it's going to get too bright again, okay? So I want to make sure I'm not doing that. And I'm going to put one on the horse's face too, because I want to see his really nice face. Maybe even a little bit brighter. If you're brightening things like this, make sure that you add the blacks back in, okay? Because look what happens if I increase the exposure and the shadows, okay? Now it's obviously edited and it looks flat, okay? So make sure that you don't go too far and keep the blacks in because it's going to keep it looking normal. Okay, you need to have contrast. Just remember that when you edit, you want to edit back in some blacks and keep your shadows. Shadows are your friend. So let's look at the before. So see how your eye is drawn from the sand or the dirt to the highlights on the top of the horse, and the little boy is almost lost. Okay, now you see the horse and the boy outlined against that dark background. Right? And I'm going to give them a little bit of clarity. Another slider you could use here is dehaze. Let me just see what happens. Oh, that works nice. Okay, so dehaze works really great when you have a situation of smoke, haze, fog, and it's just literally adding back in blacks and whites. So I could do the same thing with the blacks and the white slider. Okay, see what happens if you go the opposite way. But it's really giving it that little bit of punch. Okay, see that? Perfect. Okay, so now let's look at upside down just to complete the cycle. Now, where does your eye go? Okay, so your eye stays, for me, the dirt is still light, but it's not the lightest thing. My eye goes between the horse's face and the outline on the edge of the horse and the boy. Okay, so you want to keep the eye of the viewer circulating through the image, right? And not sort of zipping out of the image. All right. Holly wants to know, if I use a template in Luminar, do you still consider changing the camera profile? Yes, you can still go in and do that afterwards. So if you apply the template, it depends on whether or not the template has a profile in it. Okay, so you could change the profile first and then see if the template adjusts it, or you can apply a template and then go and have a look after. Okay, yeah. So you can still use them together, because anytime you apply a template, it's fully editable, right? You're not stuck with it. You're not, you don't have to stay with exactly that template. You can dial it down, or you can go in and edit any of the settings to your liking. Do I have any other questions? Because I think we're going to leave it there for today. If not, everybody's quiet today. Where's Nigel with his questions and Ron? Did we lose Ron? So tell me if you are watching this live now in the chat. Tell me if you picked up one thing today and what you learned, and I'm wait for you to type. And if you're watching this video as a replay, tell me in the comment area below the video. So I'd love to know what you're getting out of these sessions if you're a regular. Ron's still here. Hey, Ron. I'd love to know what you're getting out of these sessions. Tell me what software you're using in the chat. And if you've picked up one thing today, what did you pick up today? What one tool or one technique did I demonstrate today that you went, aha, and you had the aha moment, right? Holly says, blah, not blah. So I'm hoping that's meaning the before and the after on this one. And blah, honestly, when you look at an image and you feel that it's blah, it usually has to do with lack of contrast, right? So when you look at an image of your own, if you say blah and it looks blah, increase the whites and the blacks and do that little trick with the sliders and see if it doesn't be less blah, okay? Let's see, Holly learned something. I need to remember to look at camera profiles and consider creating my own templates. Yeah, I have a ton, Holly. I need a way to put them into folders or something because I've got a lot, right? Stephanie learned I need to get Topaz Sharpening, but also some tricks with radial filters. Awesome. Topaz Sharpen AI is a fantastic tool. Like I said, you don't need it all the time, but when you need it, like it does one thing and it does that one thing really, really good, right? If you're going to the Topaz website, there's also Topaz Denoise AI, and it does a great job on removing noise. So if you have an image that's like really high ISO or something like that, the denoise works also really great. Oh, that was not your comment. Oh, okay. Reminder, Trish says, reminder to look at the image upside down. That's a one that you'll see me talk about a lot. So yes, reminder for Trish. Awesome. Oops, we got that one already. Let's see. Vivian says, increase blacks first if lacking color. Yes, good one, Vivian. I find that a lot of people go really quickly to the saturation and vibrant sliders, and it's really easy for the color to go wonky. I saw that term in the chat earlier, wonky. So don't make your images overly saturated, but go to blacks first. Yep. Catherine says, how to use radial filters, looking for where the eye is drawn to in the photo. Awesome. Do the up and down or upside down thing, Catherine, and do check out the other video I have on radial filters, because I did like a full 20 minutes on how to apply them and how to change the settings and so on. So I'll give you even more. And that's the last comment there. So thanks, Rob. Yeah, great feedback, everybody. Keep them coming. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And then make sure you turn on notifications. So if you want to come join us live every week, I am here every week. There I am. I got lost for a second. I'm here every week. And if you want to get reminders to join me, just go to youtube.com/digital photo mentor/live, and you can set up a notice there, and it's the same time every week. We may be changing the time later into the fall, but currently right now this time is working great, and we're picking up Australians and Kiwis. So I love to have everybody from down under. Holly's learning a couple more things, memorizing 4 things to avoid in the background. Thanks, Ron. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks, Catherine. Copying the mask. That's a huge one, Deb, and that's one that I use a lot. And remember that if you want the opposite, you can invert it too, so you don't have to paint it again. Great. These are great learnings from everybody today. I just want to say thanks for joining, and we will see you again next week. Take care.